Welcome to the course Digital Transformation and Technological Innovation. So, in the previous session we started our third module, that is transitions in software markets, and we talked about the economics of software and different transitions that have happened, starting from open source software offerings to cloud computing to app stores and the ecosystem. Now, we will continue that discussion in this session as well. So, let us start. So, we are talking about the transitions in software markets, right. Now, what are the benefit, we try to analyze this further. What are the benefits to smaller firms, to startups and incumbent firms in general, right. So, we will just point out a few things. So, for smaller firms, what they got from these transitions, they got access to large and sophisticated computing power, which was earlier available only to leading tech firms. So, only leading tech firms could afford those high end servers and data centers and the cost that goes with it. They could manage the IT department and the people, right, to support that, right. But with the advent of cloud computing, now smaller firms, whatever computing that they need, they can get access to similar level of server from the cloud vendor, right. So, same large sophisticated computing power they can access, because now they would be paying only as per their uses based on some plan, right. So, that was one big change. That means pretty much any kind of non-tech firm could actually, for their business, if they want to run an app, support a website or do some computing, need to host a software that they are using for some activity for their business. So, they could just go for the cloud services and they could get large sophisticated computing power to run their software or app or website, right. So, smaller firms benefited due to these transitions, right. So, therefore, the investment in information technology, hardware and software, that increased to a significant number because of this, right. Now, startups, if we look at these startups, they could quickly reach, they could get quick reach and scale to software markets, because app ecosystem we talked about. So, you can come up with a very good app or killer app, so to say, and which could be liked by the end users. So, you get quick reach and scale, right. So, all those that used to be there in pre-app store era, they no longer apply, and startups can benefit from this quick reach and scale to software markets via app stores, and less investment capital needed to start and run, because the same cloud computing they also benefit. So, they can with the less investment capital, they also do not have to manage the servers and the computing and the hardware and everything else, just like the smaller firms. So, cloud computing benefit go to startups also, but they can reach to the markets much quickly because of the app stores. So, because of put together smaller firms and startups, so all this IT investment will go up in general, because more firms will start using computing because of these benefits. Now, if we look at the incumbent firms, they will also stand to benefit, because they will leverage these transitions to reduce cost, right. So, if there are firms which are incumbent large firms, but and they had sufficient money power to afford IT department, data center and everything, but they might feel that their core business might also be different. So, they might also feel that they can move some of that computing to cloud and therefore reduce cost, right. So, they can cut down their cost, right, better align with their business process because of all these transitions and the benefits that came about. So, therefore, all kinds of smaller firms, startups or incumbent firms, tech or non-tech, all benefited because of these transitions. Now, we discuss in more detail more characteristics of these products. So, let us start with OSS, that is open source software product. Now, this was the first transition open source software product offering. So, we will try and understand few more points here. So, while we talk about cloud computing, the servers that these cloud vendors are offering, even that is also supported by OSS products. So, in a way, these three transitions that we talked about, OSS products supporting cloud computing supporting app store. So, these three seem to be interconnected, right. So, now let us come back to OSS. So, this is fueled by open source software products. They are fueled by contribution of software developers who worked as a community, and many of them were actually employed in these top tech firms which were actually selling the commercial software products. The people who are working in a similar category in a traditional software firm on a commercial product, they were also contributing, some of them were also contributing to open source software product, because it was a win-win situation. So, because there is so much of complexity that goes in a software, and what you learn from that contribution or looking at the code of a open source software product, some of that you can use in your commercial, wherever you are contributing in the traditional software firm or in the commercial product, right. So, what you learn there, you can port it back to your commercial offering. So, there is a win-win situation there, and because the free software, it improves, right. So, people who cannot afford the commercial offering, they can go for that, right. So, it was fueled by contributions of software developers working as a community. So, there were lots of motivations that were working. Software developers, they had this era where they wanted to produce better code. So, there was this strong motivation to come up with better code than what was already there. So, whatever existing product can be improved, that can be write a better code, but within the constraints of a traditional software firm, they might not be able to do that. But in an open source community, in an open community, they can improve the code, and they can come together with lot more other contributors and write better software. So, that motivation came from there, because once you are already into software coding, programming, right, learning curve is an ongoing process, right. So, because somebody is already into that, they might be tempted to participate in the open source community and improve their skills, be up to date. So, there were many motivations why people participated in open source community, right. And then there was recognition also, you would be recognized for your contributions to those open source software product by the OSS community. So, there are many motivations that combined together, and software developers, they could contribute, why they would contribute to the open source software community. Now, source code can be modified, as we have already talked about. Source code can be modified by anyone to produce new versions, and which can also be redistributed, right. Now, if we look at the number of people, the kind of workforce that open source community has attracted, that is very huge, exceeds 40 million globally if you look at 2025 numbers, right. So, numbers might not be that accurate. So, produced using Gen AI, right, or retrieved using Gen AI. So, exceeds 40 million globally, right, measured by unique contributors to the public repository. So, we just focus on the unique contributors to open source public repositories. So, more than 40 million developers are there. That is very strong community, right. So, lots of products, and all of them being contributed by these software developers participating in this community, right. Now, later we talked about in the earlier session that initially the traditional software firm, IT firm, were threatened by the open source product, but later, as we talked about that, because software itself is quite complex, and regular or non-tech firms might not be able to use it or maintain it on their own, and they might need services and support. So, what happened later on, because what was happening in the open source community, the same people who saw a quality code or contributed to a quality code in the open source community might also port it back to the company where they are working in, right. So, the quality of the commercial offering will also benefit from the contributions that were happening in open source. So, essentially it became mutually reinforcing kind of thing, and therefore, tech firms, they started to fund foundation that set OSS standards, right, because then tech firms saw that in future some of these products which are not very profitable, they do not need to focus on, they can get it done through OSS community, right. Just there has to be some standard, there has to be some quality and all that. So, tech firms started pushing their efforts towards that, fund innovation that set OSS standards, so that OSS product could be used by these tech firms, coordinate the release of new versions of OSS products containing improvements, stable versions which could be used in the offerings of tech firms. So, they would push for the standardization and coordinated for the release of stable versions of these OSS products, right. Now, here it also important to ensure the compatibility among various versions, right. So, while there are so many people contributing, if there is no versioning and the compatibility, if nobody is coordinating for that, then it can become a problem. So, these companies, the kind of push that they gave through their funds to these foundations for OSS standard, that also ensured that compatibility is there from different versions of OSS product. So, essentially when we say compatibility, we are saying that newer versions works very similarly to older versions. So, they can work alike and operate together. So, OSS products different version, they can work with each other. So, the compatibility is there, right. So, if somebody has a particular OSS product from a previous version, but another product in the newer version, right, then still it might work, right, because of the compatibility that is being managed because of these initiatives, right. So, essentially tech firms and OSS community, there it became a sort of mutual handshake there, right. Now, the most popular OSS product, or rather some product that got this whole community started was Linux, right. This is an open source operating system software. So, earlier in our discussion during the digital infrastructure module, we have already compared Windows, Linux, Unix in various different segments and categories. So, it is the same Linux that we are talking about. It's now open source operating system software, and this is considered to be the most significant product from OSS community, right. And it's the most popular and most significant because there are so many computing devices which actually run on Linux or lightweight versions of Linux or different versions of it, right. So, Linux actually runs all kinds of computing devices. So, you will see that everywhere, because first it is free, and because of the coordination and the funding, the stable versions are also there, compatibility is also there, better quality is also there, right. So, whether we talk about the smartphones or tablets or supercomputers, we see Linux running everywhere, all kinds of devices from smartphones to supercomputers, right. So, because in comparison to other operating systems that we have spoken about in previous module, Linux seems to be everywhere, right. Some operating system might be catering to one segment, for example Windows in PC segment, or Unix in the server segment or supercomputer segment, but Linux is everywhere, whether we talk about the smartphone or the PC or the supercomputer, right. So, that gives it the popularity, right, that makes it the most significant OSS product. Now, look at how Linux is powering the web servers of big tech, right. So, all these big tech firms, how they are using it. So, the earlier point that we talked about, that these tech leaders funding the foundations setting to set a standard for OS, why all that was there, because some of these companies, they could see themselves using some of these open source software products. For example, Google, over 90% of its virtual machines in the Google cloud are actually running on Linux. If you look at Amazon, over 80% of its virtual machines in the AWS cloud, they are running Linux, right. If you look at Microsoft, which has its own operating system for cloud, which is Windows Server, but Linux percentage is more than that. So, Linux is having over 60% of virtual machines in the Azure cloud. This is again, all these numbers are retrieved through GenAI apps. So, there might be slight variations here, right. But if we look at a higher level, so whether it is about Google, Amazon or Microsoft having their own server operating system, but still Linux is running most of these web servers, most of these virtual machines in the cloud. So, in a way at a higher level, we can say that Linux is running the cloud, right. So, open source software community is running the cloud, and because of the cloud, that app ecosystem and all those things are possible. Moving on, now Let us look at some Linux version across computing devices. So, we look at the smartphone OS, it is the Android, which is from Google, that is actually based on Linux, right. So, it is a lightweight version of that, which can work well for the smartphone or the handheld devices. So, we look at the devices which are having Android, and therefore, because Linux in a way, Samsung, Xiaomi, Motorola, OnePlus, Vivo. So, all the top smartphone manufacturing firms, they are actually shipping their smartphones with Android, which is a Linux version, which is a Linux version. Notebook OS, if we look at notebooks, so there Chrome OS is there. So, otherwise then there are Windows notebook or Apple notebooks. So, Windows or Mac are dominating in the notebook or the PC laptop segment in terms of operating system. There is a new entry or rather recent entry made by Google in the case of notebook also. So, this OS is Chrome OS, which is also more like a web OS, right. So, devices the companies which are supporting or shipping this operating system is Asus, HP, Lenovo, Dell. So, many of these notebook manufacturers or laptop manufacturers from HP, Lenovo, Dell to Acer, Asus, they are actually they have come up with notebooks which are running Chrome OS, right. So, we look at a smart TV, right. We go into the appliances, right. So, TV, smart TV rather, it is running on Android, Google TV, or TiVo is another operating system. So, all these are actually Linux versions, right. So, devices which are using these operating system Android, Google TV or TiVo, and therefore a Linux version are Sony, TCL, Xiaomi, Panasonic. So, all these companies are manufacturing smart TVs which are running on Linux or its version, right. Then what are other examples, right, other computing devices. So, we look at the set top box OS, so that is also Android TV, right. Smart TV, whether we talk about the smart TV here Android/Google TV or TiVo, and or we talk about the set top box OS, which is more often than not will be connected to TV or some screen. So, that is also running Android TV. So, devices like NVIDIA, Seal, Chromecast, Tata Play and all that. So, there are lots of these set top box devices which are also running Android TV and therefore a Linux version, right. If we look at a streaming stick OS, so that is also Android TV or Fire TV. So, and the devices are Amazon Fire Stick, Roku Stick, Google TV Streamer, right. So, all these devices they are actually running on Android TV or Fire TV operating system, which are essentially lightweight versions of Linux. So, essentially we look at look at the Linux as a product, right. Why it is most significant? Because pretty much it is present pretty much across devices. Its prevalence is much more than any other operating system. We consider all kinds of devices and appliances. Now we come to the tech stack for web services, right. So, most of us we consume lots of web services, right. Before the app era also the websites or the web apps. So, all those servers which are hosting those websites or web apps, they would also like to benefit from OSS product, because reasons we have already spoken about, free alternatives and all that. So, one of the tech or the most popular tech stack is LAMP. So, now this is a more of a traditional tech stack for web services, because things have changed over the years. So, we will talk about that. Now, LAMP is acronym for L stands for Linux operating system, and then A is standing for Apache web server software, MySQL database, M is standing for that, and P is standing for PHP programming language. Sometime Python Perl are also added to the list, right. So, use cases more nowadays is earlier most of the websites they were on LAMP, but nowadays it has been limited to CMS sites. CMS essentially means content management site. So, now there are new modern stacks that have come up which are more interactive and they can manage heavy traffic. So, we will talk about that, right. So, here Linux is the operating system and Apache is the providing the execution environment. Data is being managed by MySQL, PHP is doing the backend logic, and the front end is basically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right. So that is not mentioned here in the LAMP, but in the in the latest acronyms for latest tech stacks for web services, that is now clearly labeled. So let's look at some of these stacks. So now LAMP is considered more traditional multi-layered monolithic approach, because there are different layers to it, and each layer is running on its own and it having its own complexity, and there is not so much of a smooth integration, right. Interaction is there, software to software interaction is there, that is why LAMP works, but there is not very tight integration between these layers. So essentially LAMP remains a traditional multi-layer monolithic approach. More importantly, it is a OSS tech stack. So therefore, as we talked about, whether small firms or startups or non-tech firms, they typically go for it. It's free, and obviously they can also take the services of OSS vendor in case they need ongoing support. Now, what are the new stacks and what they are targeting? So new stacks, they are more unified. Now, instead of being multi-layered, they are moving away from new stacks are moving away from multi-layered approach of LAMP to a more unified approach. Some of them are also cloud native, so moving away from monolithic approach to a cloud native approach, and then the performance focus is also there, right. So the new stacks, essentially they are also trying to bridge the gap between front end and back end, because we talked about back end logic would be PHP or other Python, Perl, other programming language, and the front is this HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So all this logic is being run by different programming languages, therefore different environment, right. So there becomes a gap in terms of the kind of integration that is possible, the kind of interaction that is possible. So the new stacks, they are actually bridging this gap that is there between front end and the back end. Now, among these stacks, new stacks, first one can be categorized as JavaScript based stacks. So here JavaScript coming into a prominent role in the new stacks, right, and the idea is moving towards sharing of code between the server and the browser. That means the back end and the front end, if there is more sharing of code, that is possible. So then new stacks are pushing towards that. So more often than not, these stacks use JavaScript or TypeScript, right, and across the entire application, right. So we consider the whole application, whole web service put together, then it would be run by so JavaScript or TypeScript. So it would be more unified, this point that we talked about. So new stacks are more unified because sharing of code between server and browser is possible, and it is the same programming languages that is being used across the entire application, whether the front end or the back end. If we look at the use case for this new stack is interactive apps, right. So interactive apps are going for these new stacks, right, especially JavaScript based stacks. Now, what are the popular stacks under this category? So first one that we'll talk about is MERN, MERN. So here M is standing for MongoDB, which is managing the data layer, and then Express.js, which is managing the backend logic, and this backend logic needs a execution environment which is being managed by Node.js, and then front end by React, right. So data layer, backend layer, front end layer, execution. So OS layer we are not talking about, because that in the new stacks they don't include OS in this, because that becomes more of infrastructure. The focus would be more towards in the technologies that are closer to web services. So therefore the data part, the backend logic, the front end logic, and the execution environment. So slight change in the terminology. So in MERN, what we have MongoDB, Express.js, React, and Node.js. This is one of the most popular JavaScript based stack or modern tech stack for web services. Now, what is the benefit of this? So MERN is being favored for rapid development speed and community support, because it has amassed a big community. So there is different problems that people might face in the development process. There is sufficient community support, and therefore that helps speed up rapid development. So, it is favored for that. So, if you are looking to quickly come up with your own web service, web app, then people might go for MEAN. Then the second variant is mean, MEAN, where M and E and N remains same, that is MongoDB, Express.js and Node.js. Only the front end changes, which is now Angular in place of React, right. So, where it is favored? So, it is favored for a structured approach, which is more suitable for large scale mission critical applications, right, where you want more reliability and stability. So, if a more structured approach is there even in the front end, so that is favored. So, Angular is considered more suitable for that. So, enterprises might favor this, large enterprises. Then the another stack is MEVN, right, now which has front end as Vue.js, right, which in place of Angular or React. So, this is favored for lightweight front end and gentler learning curve, right. So, the whole application development or service development process becomes much simpler in case of MEVN, and lightweight front end also. So, it will load faster, right. So, it will be favored if that is the requirement. Now, the next is new stacks, among that meta frameworks. Now, the meta frameworks is going next step from what we just talked about in terms of JavaScript based stack. So, just like JavaScript based stack, idea in case of meta framework is also to bridge the gap between front end and front end and the back end, right. So, this is a move away from piecing together separate tools, right. So, still we are talking about the layers, right, whether MEAN or mean or MEVN, right. In all three cases still there are different layers. So, new stacks which are meta frameworks, the move is towards moving away from piecing together these separate tools and go for all in one server first environment, right. So, it is like everything is like the application server would manage lots of things, and therefore, instead of piecing together different tools, go for more all in one approach. Now, huge case for this is more SaaS and high traffic sites. SaaS is software as a service, right. So, one of the cloud variant that will be talking more in detail later sessions. So, when software might be accessed by might have high traffic by the enterprise, and many enterprise might be accessing same software, right. So, and other high traffic sites, right. So, meta frameworks they are actually moving towards that, right. So, now another important point here is why we talked about the OS products, but why would firms go for OSS products over commercial alternatives. So, one important thing is free alternatives. So, that is there. So, some of these factors are there. So, that we will talk about in the next session, but what we will quickly do, we will just do a recap of what we discussed in this session. So, we started talking about transitions in software markets for different firms, for example, smaller firms or startups or incumbent firms. Then we talked about OSS product community, the workforce, the statistics and all that. Then we talked about tech firms, how they also did a mutual handshake with the OSS community, and the OSS standards came about, the coordination happens, new versions, stable versions were better coordinated and for the compatibility of it. Then we talked about Linux and how it is running so many computing devices, from a smartphone to supercomputers, and one of the most significant products. We also understood how some of these big techs are also benefiting from a OSS product, which is Linux, right. And we also understood different devices and operating system, how they are being powered by lightweight or different versions of Linux, right, whether it is smartphone or notebook, a smart TV, set top box or streaming stick. Then we talked about the LAMP setup and how traditional or earlier many firms they used to run their web app or websites, they used to have this tech stack LAMP. And then we talked about newer stacks, JavaScript based stacks, MEAN, mean and MEVN, and then new stacks, meta frameworks. So, let us stop here. We will continue our discussion in the next session. Thank you.